Hey everyone, welcome to the third episode of season 2 of Rethinking Christianity. I'm Caleb. I'm hanging out with Blake for this season, helping him out with the podcast. You've seen me around on a couple episodes, and I've been helping with some social media content. And I'm having a ball just talking about this stuff with Blake. I'm super passionate about it, and I'm really excited that I get to help you, the listeners, figure out how to move forward in reclaiming your faith as we walk through this topic of the season, which is reclaiming things that were stolen, trying to find a new way forward, and hold on to what faith in Jesus looks like. We know that there are many of you wanting to do that. So today we're really excited because last week you heard my story about where I came from and how I got here to this point of rethinking Christianity. And this week we're going to hear from the man, the host himself, Blake, on why he is questioning, why he has dove into this part of faith. And what ultimately, led him to start this podcast that you're listening to right now.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about me. It's so fun. What's that country song? I want to talk about me. You know what I'm talking about? I want to talk about what? You don't know that country song?
No.
Okay. Anyways, whatever. Anyways, I can't believe I just sang on the microphone. I'm excited to talk about this. So some of these stuff we'll talk about today is a little similar to like the last episode of last season, but I'm going to try and go into more detail. That episode, I think it was more focused on like why I started the podcast. I think I'm going to I'll try and give you all more details, juicy details and nuggets about my life and how I got to the point where I'm at now. So I'm excited. Yeah. Thank you, Caleb, for doing this and helping me out and asking me. It's always fun to just be the answeree and not the person asking questions and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You were on a podcast this week, weren't you?
Yes. You can't say that in church. I think if you type in, you can't say that in church. I think it's that was a cool title. Like the two guys mentioned they were going to change the name, but I was like, don't do that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The title's dope. But yeah, they were really nice. I was very humbled to get invited onto a podcast. I never thought anyone would really care what I had to say. So that was fun. So when that go check that out. It may be out now. I'm not sure yet. So we'll see.
Sweet. Well, Blake, to start off, tell us about your childhood. Go into all of the formational traumatic moments. No. What was your childhood like? You grew up in church. Tell us about that.
Yes. So growing up, I grew up in a Christian home. And I remember even when I was little, we lived in these apartments, Woodstone Apartments in Cordele, Georgia. And I can remember in the living room numerous times watching the movie Prince of Egypt. And we lived there when I was like 5, 6 years old. So from a very young age, I was presented with Bible stories and Christianity. My mom is probably the biggest influence on my life in regards to Christianity, being a Christian, because she just, that was something she wanted for me. And she does she models that for me in my life. So I grew up in a Christian home. I remember watching VeggieTales, watching Bible Man, all those things. I had a Bible Man costume. So if you're listening to this and you have no idea what I'm talking about, just go Google like Bible Man. It's like I don't even know how to explain it, dude. It was some of the worst produced, like.
Oh, it's terrible.
But like, I remember some of those episodes. I thought it was dope though when I was little, because I wasn't allowed to. There was other things I wouldn't be allowed to watch. So these were the good alternatives. But here's what it's like. It's like if you drink.
It was my hero from VeggieTales.
Yeah, if you drink
with the freaking plungers on his ears.
Yeah, dude. Okay, VeggieTales I liked VeggieTales. I still think cool. Absolutely. But that kind of stuff for me is like if you drink a real, like, say you get a beer on tap and it's just so good and it's alcoholic, and then you drink an O'Doul or whatever it's called, a non-alcoholic.
Oh my gosh.
Beer. That's what Christian like content back then was compared to like the regular stuff.
Like an O'Doul
is a horrible alternative. So anyways, so that's the way I grew up in that. Yes, I grew up in I started going to First Baptist Church when we were young. I can't remember. In my town, there was the First Baptist Church on one side of the street and literally the First Methodist Church on the other side. Like literally like a road,
Wow.
there's this road, and there were two really big traditional historic churches. So there's a group of kids that went to the First Baptist and some went to the Methodist. And honestly, like the differences in like culture of church weren't that different. Some beliefs were different a little bit here and there. They did more liturgy. But yeah, I grew up in that. I did Awana. Did you do Awana growing up?
No, I didn't, but I was around a lot of people who did.
Okay, yeah, I did Awana Wednesday nights. I remember, man, like I would like you have a little book with these Bible verses each week and stuff, and you gotta like memorize them. And if you memorize them, you can like work your way up. It's almost like work your way up the leaderboard. And like it was like competition. And I would remember I have like really good short-term memory. So I could like memorize like a verse in like 2 minutes and just like I would like go over it in my head and I'd go to my leader, like, hurry, let me recite this for you.
Yeah.
And so, I grew up in an environment of like, the word of God is inerrant, inspired, that kind of thing. So yeah, I grew up there. And then there was a time period where we didn't go to the Baptist church. All my best friends growing up went to the Methodist church, so across the street. So I would start going to youth with them. I would go there. I remember, honestly, I think one of the first kind of engagements with someone that I really like thought was like, wow, this guy's really intelligent, was the youth pastor there. And if he listens to this, so his name was Victor Scott. Actually, he does a lot of writing now, and he's a pastor. But I remember going to a youth group there, and Victor, just the way he taught like things was actually really, really, really good. And it made you think, and it was really, just good. And so that was a positive highlight. So I went there. So I was back and forth at times, and it was not until like my parents got divorced when I was 16, and they got separated when I was 15. That I started really consistently going to church. The time periods I'm kind of mentioning of my early childhood up into my teenage years, it was very sporadic and inconsistent. And honestly, I didn't think about Christianity at all, really. I just kind of think I assumed that everyone was Christian and that this was just the world that I lived in. And then like we would have people that maybe didn't believe, and I almost kind of felt like it was like you pitied everyone else that wasn't.
Yeah.
That's kind of,
I felt that too. Yeah. Like I said in the last episode, I was homeschooled. And so that was great. But when I went to college for the first time and had like my first public school experience, I look back and I noticed how I just looked at everybody. And it was like, I had this notion that they all knew that they were supposed to be good Christians. Yeah. But none of them were, and they were just all really ashamed about it. And so I kind of came across as this judgmental prick of, well, you know what you should be doing, and where you should be on Sunday, and Tuesday night with us at BCM. But you have this idea that everyone else is aware of the same kind of Christian culture that you grew up in because that was your world. So you think it's everyone else's world. And that's a hard thing to kind of shake out of,
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I feel like, because I grew up in rural South Georgia area, so there was some diversity, but it was just like, there's white people and black people, and then sporadic, like some here and there, there'd be people from like maybe from the Middle East, so some Pakistani people and things like that, and some of them would have different religions, and I would always be like, oh no, I feel so bad for them. And, I don't know if, whatever, I don't know if that was right or wrong back then, whatever. But yeah, so I grew up in that. And then at 16, I got involved. I started heavily getting involved in the youth group that I went to at First Baptist. It was a student pastor that really poured into me. He's a big influence on my life. And I would not be working in church today if it weren't for those time periods. So my experience in church, honestly, wasn't like really that negative necessarily. Like I think the people I was around and things like that, I really enjoyed my time there. I thought it was good and positive for the most part. Nowadays, I probably would disagree with I definitely disagree with the way in which I thought about things and the way in which I approached Christianity back then. But I felt like I said, those time periods shaped who I am today. And I think that some were good, some were bad or whatever, but I definitely wasn't in any toxic like environments in any kind of way. I kind of got blessed by having people in my life who did say that they were Christians, actually cared about me and loved me.
Yeah.
And I think that for me personally, and I know this is not everyone's experience, I got lucky, but I feel like I had, for the most part, good experience in church. But yeah, so that's what shaped me and molded me. And I eventually, I got to college. College is, I've kind of mentioned on that episode of last season, is where my beliefs started really getting shaped. But yeah, I definitely grew up in the evangelical culture though. Dude, I can remember, so I mentioned, I did Awanas, watched Bible Man, watched VeggieTales. Did y'all ever go to the Lifeway Christian bookstore and just kind of like
Yeah,
wander? Oh
but
my
we
gosh.
didn't have Lifeway. We had
We had an alternative
Hallmark
of there.
store.
What was it?
We had Hallmark.
Oh,
There was a Hallmark store, and then there was another kind of Christian bookstore. I don't remember what it was called. I think it was just a standalone one. But we definitely had Hallmark, and we were always,
I know
going.
Hallmark was a Christian. Is Hallmark a Christian company?
Well, I don't know if it's explicitly Christian, but they had a lot of Christian material in that store. And so that was always where my grandmother, and my mom wanted to go for stuff. I
Well,
don't
we
know.
had,
I might be
yeah.
I might be conflating it with another store. I actually don't remember that
You know
well.
what's funny though? That is honestly, Hallmark cards are kind of how like Christianity has been presented somewhat over the years. Like as all it
Oh,
is
just
a
super
crutch.
simplified,
Yeah.
like yeah.
Yeah. Just be encouraged by Jesus, but don't change anything
Yeah.
about your life.
Jeremiah 29:11.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Let's not go down this road. But
Yeah. Another
we
episode.
don't need
Another
to
episode.
sidetrack. So yeah, so I remember I would go to Lifeway, and I remember there would be like, different music, like alternative musics. I remember the first rap CD that I bought was Lecrae, and it was
Like a Christian
after
rap. Which one was it?
Lecrae, After the Music
So,
Stops.
okay.
It was
Okay.
actually kind of fire, honestly. Like, that one song, Jesus music. You know that song?
Yes.
Riding with my
Yes.
top down, listening to this
Yeah.
Jesus music. Yeah. I used to think that was so cool. I'd have it in my little CD player with my like little headphones over my head on like trips to my grandparents' house. And I'd listen to the CD over and over again. And one of the first CDs that my mom gave me that was like not Christian or whatever was Switchfoot, A Beautiful Letdown. And
Yes.
honestly, that album's fire, even like to me at least, even nowadays. And what's funny to me is John Foreman, like Switchfoot was kind of like given to, I guess, evangelical kids or whatever as like a alternative, like to not like bad rock music and secular music. But he's pretty progressive in the way in which he thinks. So like, I think
Ron Foreman. Oh yeah.
yeah. So I think it's just ironic that was kind of what was there early on. So that's what yeah, I literally can remember the day going to this Christian book and music store in my hometown and grabbing that Lecrae CD and asking my mom if I could get it.
Yeah.
She let me buy it. And Toby Mac, obviously.
Oh gosh. Yes, we could go down a long rabbit hole with those.
Yeah, so that is what kind of shaped me. I had positive experiences in the church, but I definitely had a kind of thinking that was presented to me as absolute truth. And growing up, I think that anything alternate to that was something I should be like wary or cautious of.
Guarded.
I remember I remember we had a senior Sunday one time at church, and our student pastor, he gave the talk or gave the sermon or whatever. And then the lead pastor came up at the end, and he had these books that he wanted to give to parents that had kids going to college. And this book, essentially, the topic was how to keep your faith in college. We want to give this to our kids so they can be safe and protected when they go off to college and they don't abandon their faith. So that kind of that was the setting in which I was in, which, it shaped who I was going to Shorter. And, so yeah, that's kind of my childhood growing up. At least that's the stuff that shaped my faith in the culture. So I grew up in an evangelical culture.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big fear among a lot of evangelical families, especially parents, that their kids are going to go off to college and get indoctrinated, especially if it's not a Christian school explicitly, you know. But I feel like I was talking about this with my wife the other day, that I never really felt like my professors were pushing me to believe any certain thing. I mean, of course, you had the couple that were in there, you know, and maybe this depends on the school, but I always felt like I had the freedom to walk out of the classroom and say, okay, well, I can take that or leave it. The test is just testing my knowledge on this thing, not whether I agree with it or not, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be about that. So I think that's where a lot of people, but people are presented with these ideas that they've never heard about before. And so, yeah, I mean, in a way, a lot of people do go to college and end up changing what they think and how they believe. But I don't think it's because they're being indoctrinated. I think it's just because they're being presented with the opportunity to work through what they believe, which they might not have had that opportunity before, you know.
A lot of times it's just they're being presented with stuff that the church kept hidden from them for so long that they don't know how to reconcile with it. It's a shock factor. I think I've mentioned in past episodes, there's a shock factor of like, it's fight or flight kind of thing. Like either I'm going to fight and deal with this and wrestle with it. And a lot of people don't know how to do that without abandoning it. So
yeah, exactly. So what has just lately we're in this season, we're talking about the theme of reclaiming our faith. Yes. And in a season or a time of our lives where we're probably wrestling through a lot, like we were just talking about, of what we will believe. So how did the question, how did you get here? You pretty much would say you went to college, you were exposed to different ideas. Are there any specific moments or conversations that you had that really sparked some of these things in your head?
Yes. So I've mentioned in a previous episode that I had a professor that was like really vital in shaping how I like approach the Bible. And the Bible is where it all kind of began for me. And I would kind of ask questions sometimes to other professors that weren't like him. I honestly there was just one, and he would just kind of like brush off the questions. And I think that my thing was, I felt like a lot of times when it came to the Bible, if you pointed out some kind of contradiction or something that seemed questionable or whatever, there was never like, no one could ever just say, yeah, that is kind of, we don't know what to do with that. It was never that. And I would have been fine with that answer, but it was always like a workaround, like mental gymnastics to try to make this fit. It's like a puzzle piece trying to fit into a slot that doesn't work. And
like a cheap explanation.
Yeah, it was all, So moments like that really shaped kind of how I thought. And also part of a big influence of my thinking. So I have like the theology and philosophical side of things in the Bible that made me question things. But then, you know, early on in college, I really liked the megachurch culture of like Passion City and Hillsong. And I really, honestly, early on, I had a huge influence from that kind of stuff in my faith. And because I like the parts about it where it was like, we don't want to be judgmental. We want to be welcoming to people. We want to be open. We want to lead people to Jesus. We don't want to be traditional and fundamental like the past church has been. And so I like those things. And I thought, you know, I like the whole, like the style and things like that. I even like Passion City and that whole thing, Passion Conference in the way they presented Christianity had a huge influence on how like the language we used when we would like lead a college ministry and the way we would dress. I wore skinny jeans and Chelsea boots and like denim and like beanies and things like that. And so like, that was like, all of these kind of moments kind of started to like, or all of that was kind of all part of me beginning to like, I had to come to a point where I had to start observing like, what do I do with all this? Like, is this me or is this what I actually believe, or is all this like just influence on me? So I think those were moments really with the professors and the questions that I would ask. I had another professor, I went to his office and I went to him and I was like, look, I don't really know what to do with these questions that I have about the Bible. And he was the head of the department at the time. And he actually was like, you know what? Here's a book you should read. It's called Inspiration and Incarnation by Peter Enns. Pete Enns.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I ordered this book, and once I began to read that book and he began to present just head on so like a minute ago I mentioned, I wish somebody would just say we don't really know what to do with these things, or what do we do with these things. When I began to read that book, it was the first time I engaged with someone that was being honest, or it felt like it was being honest with things that I had questions about. So I remember reading it in my bedroom when I was in Rome, and I was reading it, and I just was like plowing through it. I loved reading it. And I began to like finally reconcile with, it's okay for me to like not know or have answers. And it's not a sin for me to question like these things that I'm reading in this book or in the Bible that I don't really know what to do with. And that was the point when I had graduated college, and I was outside of the friend groups that I had been for so long, and kind of just on my own a little bit, and kind of having to like be an adult. That first year out of college is kind of weird because you're away from all the people you had been around for so long. And so all of that kind of led me to a point where I was like, okay, well, what do I believe? And that almost felt like permission to just begin to explore. And so those were really formative years, like from 2015, when I got to Shorter, to 2019 was really kind of what shaped my beginnings of questioning and being engaged with authors that I never would have engaged with before. So you got to think, like, my perspective is, I mentioned growing up in a very evangelical culture, where on my lunch break when I worked at Chick-fil-A, I'd be reading like David Platt and John Piper and Louis Giglio and all these authors they had kind of one way of thinking about things.
Right.
And then reading people like, Pete Enns or Rob Bell or whoever. And so that was the shift that I was kind of working through. So that I don't know if there's specific moments, but it's honestly just a collection of different like moments and cultural influences that kind of led me to where I'm at now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of our listeners would relate to that too. It's maybe we have some sort of wake up moments or, enlightenment moments, but I think a lot of us would also agree that it's a collection of different experiences and questions and conversations. And so thinking about this idea of reclaiming your faith, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to us as we've talked about this, and how do we do that? Once you've been deconstructing for so long, so I think for me, it's felt like, okay, well, what is okay? What do I still hold on to? Yeah. When you're so exposed or so like overwhelmed with how much you're seeing in the gaps of how you've understood Christianity, it's so easy to just, want to look back at it all and be like, well, what was of value, And so I think for me and you both, we're kind of moving forward and okay, actually we've deconstructed a while, we've demolished a good bit, but what do we want to hold on to? What's really true about this? That was a lot there, but what does reclaiming your faith mean for someone who's been doing that?
So something I didn't really mention in kind of giving some of my background is, I kind of like gloss over the whole thing, but like there were moments where I was kind of fearful because like I was afraid. I remember watching, this was during the pandemic, and like everyone was quarantining. I remember watching like, I think it was Rhett and Link is their name. And I watched two of their videos where they talk through their deconstruction stories. And they began to really present some really hard questions. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this, I don't know what to do with this. And I remember just honestly, like in the middle of one episode, I just exited out of the internet, and I was just like, I don't know what to do here. So I think in regards to that, so I don't want to just like present all of this as like, oh, this has just been, a journey. It's easy, or there's moments of anxiety and fear. I remember there are moments where I'd be laying in bed and I'd be like, okay, just turn your brain off and quit thinking about the answers to all these questions. So I know there are listeners that you're going through that and you're dealing with that. And, I can definitely relate to you. And I think that sometimes it's good to not exit out of the internet, so to speak. It's good to just really just take the thing that is drawing up fear in you head on and just deal with it, because I think that it does something for us. And so I think asking the question of like, am I okay with being wrong? Am I okay with these things, these structures that have been so monumental in my life being shattered? Am I okay with that? Are these things a crutch? Are these things that just make me feel comfortable and safe? Because here's the thing, I think there's a huge difference between what makes us feel comfortable and safe and what is actually true and is needed as followers of Jesus. So that's kind of, I think that begins, and you may honestly have a moment where it's kind of like a grieving time where you're like, okay, I just have to deal with the fact that these are not things that I believe anymore. And these are not things that I hold to anymore. So I think reclaiming begins with being content with where you're at in your questioning. And I don't think you can really, I don't think you can really move forward too far until you come to that point and just reconcile the fact that like, okay, I'm at this place. What do I do? It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like an intervention with yourself. Like, all right, here we are. Where do we move from here? And so I think that practically for me, like reclaim my faith, it begins with reading a lot of different people who believe a lot of different things, taking what I feel is true and holding to the things that I think that Jesus taught and holding to the life that Jesus presents. And faith is such a hard thing, because what we have been, I think, in the culture that I grew up with, faith was communicated to me as certainty. Having faith is to be certain about. And to me, faith is more so like getting on an airplane and like having a little fear, but just getting on and seeing what happens. And like, or just like something sitting in a chair. Those were the kind of like illustrations that were used. And so for me, faith is like not certainty, but it is trust in the midst of uncertainty, I guess. If that makes sense. So reclaiming faith for me has been exploring Catholic ideals, exploring Orthodox ideals, looking at the teachings of Jesus from people who have a different perspective. And a big influence on me is I really do I go back to the Bible. And I don't mean that in like, oh, well, it's the word of God and you need to listen to it and obey it, or you're not really true to the Christian faith. When I look at the Bible, I look at there's just so much depth to it that a lot of times we misunderstand what it's teaching because we're not willing to engage with all the history and the background, the context and the culture. And so there's a whole world of the world of Jesus and the world of the ancient Israelites and the world of Paul, and that was influencing the things that they were writing in the Bible. And it has a huge impact on the way we interpret it because we like to put our own context onto those things. And so that's kind of for me. That's why I have this. It's like a never ending journey because there's so much to be learned that I don't ever feel like I can find a landing spot, because it's like, there's still so much I don't know. I'm still uneducated in so many different areas. So I try to always be reading and thinking and then doing this podcast. So that's kind of for me at least.
Yeah. Like there's a tendency we just want the Bible to be this easy, clear, simple, literal reading all the time where we can just go to it and pull what we need. But it takes work to really understand what it's trying to tell us. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of context that we need to know. Like I love the way that I think it's Pete Enns. I don't know. It might be Richard Rohr, Tim Mackey. I don't know. Some of these guys we listen to.
They all kind of allude to the same similar.
Yeah. One of them I think it was the book Interpreting Scripture Through Western Eyes, Reading Scripture with Western Eyes. Them talking about every time you go to the Bible, you need to go to it with the mindset that you're stepping into not only a different time period, but a different country with a different language and a different culture that you don't know anything about. And you can't just take it from surface level and just expect to understand everything it means. You have to dive in and really wrestle things. And I think that this is how Jesus approached scripture too. They wrestled through things. I mean, there's a whole genre of Jewish text, right, called the Midrash, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
Where they literally just reinterpret stories. Yeah. And I might be saying that wrong, but there was definitely an element to we don't have the final interpretation of this stuff, and it's something that we're constantly coming back to, and constantly allowing it to shape us and challenge our minds, challenge our hearts, and ultimately point us to Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Jesus would literally say. You've heard it said, but I say to you.
Yeah.
So Jesus did that. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think the one thing that I've always struggled with is like, and I hate this phrase. I struggle with it as in when people say it, it frustrates me because I think it's not as simple as this, but they'll say like, God gave us the Bible so that anyone can understand it. It's simplified so anyone can understand it. And yes, I think people can understand it, but it ain't just as simple as like you read your King James Version Bible and it's going to be like all clear.
Right.
So
yeah, like if you can read English and you can read an English translation of the Bible and you can know what it's saying in English, but I think it's the meaning that we need to work for.
Yeah.
What does all of it mean? What is it there for? Not just what it just plain and simple says. The Bible clearly says. It's not always that simple.
Yeah, reading the Bible, I compare reading the Bible should be like if you decided to move to another country that you've never engaged with at all. So for instance, I guess when you moved to Italy or when you decided to go to Italy or really engage with the fact that you're going to be living there, you had to learn about like cultural influences, certain manners and certain things like that. I remember when I was in college, I was on the tennis team for a little bit. And I remember that like there were a couple of French players and I remember someone burping in front of them and they thought it was the most disgusting thing ever, like belching. And I was just like, I didn't know what the big deal was. And so even that was just like, there's such a huge cultural difference. And so, so the Bible is a definite, for me, reclaiming my faith is this journey of understanding the Bible and understanding kind of what it actually means. And then along with like engaging with a lot of different thoughts about Christianity. So,
yeah, what you said earlier about just coming to a place of being content with not having all of the answers, I think that is such a huge thing because it takes off a lot of the anxiety and the fear of having some wrong answer. Like when we moved here, I didn't realize it until a couple months after, and I've been coming here for 10 years. This is the first time we've lived here full time though, but my wife really noticed that I would kind of try to act like I knew what I was doing in every single situation, even if I really didn't, and I started to realize that I had this idea that I had to fake it, that I couldn't let anyone know that I was American or I was going to stand out and I was, not going to fit in to the culture. My Italian had to be perfect because if it wasn't, they were immediately going to know that I'm an outsider. I'm a stranger, but that way of living was actually I didn't even realize how anxious I was, just going in the grocery store and rushing and figuring out because I had this idea that if I stopped, I would look like I didn't know what I was doing or I didn't know where something was. And I think that this might also apply in some way to our faith. Like we feel like any moment of uncertainty or discomfort might expose us as bad Christians, but I felt so much freer and relaxed when I just accepted, I am American and I'm an outsider here and I'm not going to be an insider probably for a while and probably ever, but there is some element of, okay, like that's fine. I can just be an outsider.
It's a really good illustration.
And like now I'm just like, okay, I'm learning and I feel the freedom to walk up to somebody and say, well, okay, I'm looking for this thing, but I don't know the word for it. Can you help me? Instead before I would just, if I didn't know the word for something and I needed it, I wouldn't look for it at all. And I wouldn't ask anybody for it at all because I didn't want anyone to know I didn't know what I was talking about.
Oh my gosh.
you know,
Yeah,
I,
that's cool.
yeah, it's living overseas will definitely teach you how you think, and it will show you your culture and how it's influenced you.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have, in whatever different things, we all have safeguards that kind of help us, be
Yeah.
comfortable. So,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, Blake, for sharing your story and being honest. And yeah, any last thoughts? Anything you want to share?
um, let's see. Yeah. So if you're a person that is like, here's kind of our stories and you relate to this, I think that what I have had to do, as I mentioned earlier, like I've found some of the positive in the different things that I've been, wrestling with and working through. And like the influences in my life they've been positive and negative. There are things like I read like for a long time that I felt like kind of were really confusing. I remember reading, like I mentioned, like when I would go on break at Chick-fil-A. And I remember reading like Radical by David Platt. And I remember reading that book and like thinking like, man, I'm not a good Christian because I'm not willing to go to another country and potentially die for Jesus.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
so like I've had to like, notice where like, okay, that maybe that wasn't healthy, but also like the people around me in my youth group, for instance, like they were very influential in being good, showing me what good community looks like, because these were people I was really close friends with. It was very like, it was non-judgmental. They cared about me. Like I had a student pastor that cared about like the stuff going on in my life with my parents. They showed me what the love of Jesus looked like. So if you kind of relate to this, I hope that maybe you can find maybe moments where you have been shown what Jesus does look like, or you have been shown what community looks like. And being able to pick and take the things that have been positive and negative, and just taking those things and allowing them to teach you something, I think is so vital to the, quote, deconstruction process and reconstruction of faith. Because if we cannot learn from all things, we miss out on a lot of like really valuable things and just having a posture of humility is what I think Jesus is teaching us. And every story that I hear of people that are dealing with different things, when I listen to your story on the last episode, and when I hear stories or we get messages on Instagram of people's stories and things like that, I think you have to always have this place of humility, so that you can be empathetic to what people have walked through and have dealt with. And I think we have to do that to ourselves sometimes. And I think we have to like really listen to ourselves and listen to the experiences that we've gone through and how valuable they can be, even if at times they didn't seem that way. Now, this is not to say like for people that have had like abuse and things like that, that you should just chop it up to like a lesson to be learned. But I think people that have had positive experiences and negative ones that haven't been damaging, I think can really find value in story. And so the reason we did these 2 episodes was because we wanted to like present story to people and present, some stuff about ourselves, but we're just like you as a listener. We are people who have had different backgrounds and things like that. And we've had people that have been good to us and been bad to us and all those things. And maybe you grew up in a completely different kind of Christian context than us, but you're still wrestling with these things. So we value each other's stories and other stories. And that's what this podcast is for, is to help you and your story continue to be shaped. And we hope that it helps you follow Jesus better. So I know, I hope that the stuff that I shared, you can kind of relate to, and kind of my perspective is a little different than Caleb's, because mine comes from more of the Bible and kind of thinking and questioning. And Caleb's, yours was some of that, but it seems like you definitely had more of like, you really critiqued like the culture around you of like, just like politics and conservatism. And I had some of that, but not probably as much as you did.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely more the people that I was around that, made me start to rethink some stuff rather than the content,
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again, Blake. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. And we hope that you will continue to walk with us in this season as we try to figure out what it looks like to reclaim our faith and continue following Jesus. So check us out on Instagram. We post pretty frequently over there. We've also been tweeting a little bit lately. So if you're on Twitter, follow us there. And our YouTube, we post these. Yeah. And if you want to see our faces while you listen to these episodes, we post the videos on YouTube at Rethinking Christianity Podcast. So check us out there as well if you want to put a face to the voices. And we will see you on the next episode.